Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is the Iranian election. The clear victor in Iran's presidential election is Ebrahim Raisi, or Raisi. Ebrahim Raisi. Within hours after the election was called, Syria, Hezbollah, and Hamas had all sent congratulatory wishes to the new Iranian president. As that old expression goes, you can tell a person by the company he keeps. Much has been written about Raisi. He has been nicknamed, by the way, the Butcher of Iran, or the Butcher of Tehran. Well-earned monikers, and the reflection of his role in the execution of over 30,000 Iranian political prisoners in 1988. He is anti-West and his preferred candidate of the military and the religious leadership of Iran. Ebrahim Raisi was a candidate endorsed by the supreme leader. With that support and with that endorsement, there has been a certain, from the very outset, that there was no doubt as to who the winner in the Iranian election would be. Raisi is expected to officially assume his role of president in mid-August. And there is already talk of his next position. The thinking is that Ebrahim Raisi is being groomed to succeed the 82-year-old supreme leader, the Grand Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, after he leaves office or upon his death. The issue of succession was even raised during the presidential debate. Elections in Iran are labeled by Iranian leadership as free and open, but nothing is further from the truth. The supreme leader is ultimately in control of Iran, its politics and its foreign policy, and there's no exception. If you need proof that the presidential election was, to use the vernacular, rigged, look no further than the process of selecting the candidates. All but 7 of 592 candidates were disqualified from running. 40 of those candidates disqualified, by the way, were women. They were immediately disqualified. Only 7 candidates received the nod of approval. Then 3 of them dropped out, leaving only 4 left. And all 4 of them were extremists, even more extreme than the current regime. The most extreme of them all will be the next president of Iran, Raisi. In contrast, the outgoing regime was described as reformers and liberals, but these terms must be understood in the context of the language of Iran. The outgoing regime was brutal in their crackdowns against anti-government groups and in social media. The users of social media were also brutally abused, as well as their organizers. Anyone dressed immodestly was arrested. Journalists and foreigners were arrested. Activists and political prisoners were arrested and executed. Iranian voters had no alternative candidate to support, so many simply did not vote. Iranian voters wanted to vent their frustrations, so many simply did not vote at all. Iranian voters wanted to protest their lack of options, to protest the oppressive regime, to protest the horrible state of their economy. An economy, by the way, that the Iranian leadership has not been able to repair. So many Iranian voters simply did not vote. They didn't go to the polls. Those who did vote made it only easier for the Grand Ayatollah to justify his choice of winner. Those who voted to please the supreme leader. And so they cast the ballots for Ebrahim Raisi, a man who in televised presidential debates was asked to clarify how he received a doctorate in law while only completing a 6th grade secular education. He didn't answer the question, but he did vehemently deny that he only has a 6th grade education. The position of President of Iran was not the only post Iranians filled in this election. 200,000 seats on local councils and city councils were filled. 6 seats in the Iranian parliament were filled. And maybe even more important than the presidential election, the Council of Experts also selected 6 of their 12 seats. It's the Council of Experts, by the way, that chooses Iran's supreme leaders, like the Grand Ayatollah. Serious leadership around the world is worried, yet the P5+1 has not called off negotiations with Iran to secure a nuclear deal. Outgoing President Rouhani has been quoted saying that he is convinced that the agreement with the P5+1 will be signed and in place before the new president transitions into power. He says that he has seen the most recent drafts of the agreement, and all the difficult parts of the agreement with the West have been removed. Western leadership, including the Biden administration, was hopeful that as a result of their new dialogue and openness with Iran, Iran would choose less extreme candidates for presidency. We see how that worked out. But Iran was never interested in more openness. No reformists were chosen to run for the presidency. They are in dialogue only in order to achieve their goals, that is Iran. Iran wants sanctions lifted. Iran wants the ability to produce and sell nuclear technology. The P5+1 are mistakenly optimistic. They are Pollyannish in their thinking. Iran will drive the deal, and Iran will get exactly what they want and probably more than they expected. And then President Ebrahim Raisi will take everything Iran got and do with it what he wants. It falls to Israel to monitor Iran and to draw up plans that will slow them down. Israel must stop Iran from achieving their nuclear goals. Israel must stop Iran from achieving their goal of becoming a regional leader. Only Israel cares enough to stop them. Only Israel is wise enough to see the real Iran. I've also been thinking about something I read on JNS. The piece reveals a shocking new reality about how the United Kingdom views Israel and Palestine. According to the JNS report, Israel's Foreign Ministry is investigating a report that an Israeli woman had her birthplace changed from Jerusalem to occupied Palestinian territories upon renewing her UK passport. Ayelet Balaban, a dual Israeli-British citizen who has held a UK passport all her life, said she was shocked upon receiving the new document according to Israel's Khan network. According to Balaban, she sent her passport to England about 2 weeks ago and received the new one on Monday. Upon discovering the change, Balaban checked with her brother, who renewed his British passport 2 years ago, and which still listed Jerusalem as his birthplace. Her brother, who works at Nefesh B'Nefesh, an organization helping Jews from English countries immigrate to Israel, said this is the first time the organization has encountered the change. Balaban sent a letter to Israel's ambassador to the United Kingdom, Tzipi Hotovely, on Tuesday, but she has not heard back yet. Inquiries have also been sent to the British Embassy in Israel. If this is true, we have been underestimating the United Kingdom. Coming up next, Points of View. First up is an editorial from the Jerusalem Post. It was posted on Sunday, June 20th, 2021. The editorial is entitled, "Decision to Investigate Meron Tragedy Took Too Long." Subtitled, "Men and boys found themselves compressed into a tiny space, with more people filling into the walkway from the rear, unaware of what was happening further down and trapping those already inside." It is, of course, unauthored, as are all editorials. It's the opinion of the editorial board. The editorial begins, "The decision to establish a state commission of inquiry to investigate the Mount Meron disaster, as approved on Sunday by Prime Minister Naftali Bennett's nascent government, took too long, but it is better late than never." The editors here are absolutely correct. Better late than never. There are also elements of being correct, because this was a huge shanda, that there had not been investigation up until now. I would add that I know people who were big supporters of Bibi, who wanted him ousted because he did not demand an investigation. The editorial continues, "It should have been an obvious step for a country in the aftermath of the worst civilian disaster in its 73-year history. Unfortunately, even something so obvious got caught up in petty politics. Former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu refused to advance a state commission in order to protect his own ministers who were involved in the decision to approve the mass event, as well as his close allies from the Haredi ultra-Orthodox parties who pushed for approval despite the well-known dangers and risks. Defense Minister Benny Gantz submitted the proposal to the cabinet. A disaster that should have been avoided obligates us to learn systematic lessons at the national level, Gantz said. The 45 victims no committee can return, and the physical and mental scars of hundreds present At the scene, we cannot hide. But we can prevent the next tragedy. We can prevent the pain of many families. Only a state committee of inquiry, which is not dependent on any political official, will be able to get to the truth. And I personally, and the members of the entire government, are committed to this. Bennett and Gantz are correct. It is essential to find out what went wrong. But until now, people were worried who and what might be discovered, and worried that the results of an investigation might hurt them politically and hurt the political security and stability of the Netanyahu coalition. Now the editorial asks, what held up the investigation? And it answers its own question. The Haredi parties, Shas and United Torah Judaism, UTJ, this is how the editorial puts it. In other words, it took a government without Haredi parties to be able to do something that will benefit the Haredi sector. It was Haredim who were mostly killed that fateful night. And Meron is a holy site mostly visited on Lag BaOmer by Haredim. The State Commission is for all Israelis to prevent additional disasters like this one in the future. But it's first and foremost the pursuit of justice for those who were killed and those widows and orphans who were left behind. The Commission will not be able to bring those who were killed back to life, but the government can do everything to prevent an unnecessary loss of life in the future, Bennett said at Sunday's cabinet meeting. And that is the true purpose of the State Commission of Inquiry. Politics need to be set aside, and a genuine and thorough investigation needs to be conducted to ensure that events of this kind do not repeat themselves. Carelessness and negligence led to the disaster at Meron. It cannot be allowed to happen again. This is critical, there's no doubt about it, for the families and the victims and the injured. And it is also critical that Israel makes certain that nothing like this, nothing like the Meron tragedy, ever happens again. Next up is a column by Eli Podeh. And it appears also in the Jerusalem Post, also on June 20th, 2021. Podeh is a professor of the Middle East Studies at Hebrew University, actually got his doctorate at Tel Aviv University. He often contributes commentary to the Jerusalem Post. This column is actually entitled, Is Egypt Back in the Arab Driver's Seat? It's an analysis. And it's subtitled, The Gaza Operation Also Resulted in a Warming of Egyptian-Israeli Relations. This is how Podeh begins. Egypt disappeared from the Middle East after the 2011 Arab Spring. Well, the term disappeared is perhaps too strong, but it certainly adopted a lower profile. Anyone accustomed to Egypt's leading role in the Arab world, not just under Gamal Abdel Nasser, was forced to accept the fact that Egypt had become just another actor, while the rich oil-producing Gulf countries assumed leading regional roles. From the Egyptian standpoint, it was frustrating to see small Gulf states stealing the show from al-Dunya, mother of the world, as the Egyptians call their country. It's hard to pinpoint when that shift began, but a possible turning point was the February 2019 establishment of the Cairo Regional Gas Forum, comprised of Egypt, Israel, Greece, Cyprus, Italy, Jordan, and the Palestinian Authority. Podeh moves on to explain why Egypt has re-emerged and is now comfortably in the role of mediator. He writes, Israel's May 2021 military operation in Gaza provided Egypt with yet another opportunity to bolster its standing in the region by mediating with Hamas. Egypt has always played a key role in Israel-Hamas mediation, even under President Morsi, providing Israel with leeway when it wanted to, for example, during the 2014 Operation Protective Edge, and reining it in when it sought a speedy end to the fighting. Either way, Egypt was instrumental in achieving ceasefires and humanitarian aid. Simply put, Egypt is a regional player, I've got to tell you that. And there's no doubt about it now. One of the most important players in the region at that. I actually believe that. And Podeh is correct, and this is how he explains it. Egypt's involvement in Gaza is understandable. First, because the enclave lies along its border and is a potential powder keg threatening the stability of the region. in general and specifically Egypt. Second, it allows the administration to portray itself as a regional leader on a key Middle Eastern issue. Just as important, the mediation provides Sisi with a seal of approval in Washington, where the Biden administration is intent on reining in regimes violating human rights. 2 phone calls by Biden to Sisi during the fighting in Gaza made him favor of the month. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken also conducted visits to Cairo, Jerusalem, Ramallah, and Amman. Egypt continued to lead the mediation, with Foreign Minister Sama Shakri visiting Amman and Ramallah, whereas the head of military intelligence, Abbas Kamal, is actively trying to paper over differences among Israel, the PA, and Hamas. Podeh concludes by listing all the places Egypt has been involved in lately, not just with the Palestinians. They have signed defense agreements, he writes, with the Nile River countries, Uganda, Kenya, Burundi, Sudan. In November 2020, it joined the Red Sea Council, representing Djibouti, Eritrea, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Somalia, Sudan, and Yemen. All these moves were designed not only to challenge Ethiopia's regional ambitions. Podeh qualifies and hedges a little bit. But it is clear to him that Egypt is back in the driver's seat, as he writes. Does the Egyptian activism signal a sea change? It's too soon to tell. One must not forget that regional leadership is acquired with political, economic, military, and demographic capital. Egypt has, in recent years, built a large army, although the extent of its readiness is in doubt, judging by its handling of the Islamic State challenge in the Sinai. Egypt's economy is in tatters following the coronavirus pandemic and absence of tourism, whereas demographic growth poses a heavy economic burden. All these factors do not augur success for Egypt in resuming its historic regional standing, but its renewed energies could turn it into what the late Egyptian journalist Hussein Haikal once termed a key state. Excellent piece by Podeh. Excellent. Coming up next, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. I want to show you 7 cartoons and memes today. This first is a picture from Clifton, New Jersey, which is suburban New York City. It was a shocker when I found out where this poster was displayed. It's a photo of a pool hall and hookah bar, displayed a huge banner. The banner is the former Israeli Prime Minister with a Hitler-style mustache. There's also an Israeli flag with a swastika in the middle in place of the Star of David. The banner reads, "Stop the New Nazis." Next up is a cartoon about post-COVID and getting back into things. This will be part of a theme in the next few cartoons that we look at. In this case, a couple is at the romantic dinner for the first time since COVID. They're wearing their pajama pants. He says, "I can't help thinking I forgot something." She says, "I know what you mean." That's funny. The next cartoon compares bears and people. Bears coming out of hibernation and people coming out of COVID. It reads, when bears come out of hibernation, bears are in a state of walking hibernation for several weeks. They may appear drunk or in a slumber until their bodies return to normal. When humans emerge from COVID hibernation, ditto. This next cartoon is set in a hospital. The patient, who appears to be very sick, is being told that he should smile. The nurse tells him, "The rest of your family is vaccinated, so they can visit you." This next meme is sad, and unfortunately, it strikes a very powerful and dangerous chord for the American Jewish community. The meme is a picture of Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, and the caption reads, "Days since last anti-Semitic statement," and it has a very big red 0. These next 2 headlines are funny and true. The first reads, "German army to rescue beer trapped in Afghanistan." The last headline reads, "Turks enraged as Ancestry.com reveals the truth. Most of them are Greeks." For proud Turks, that is a very hard hit. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. Israel is loaning the Palestinian Authority 1.2 million Pfizer COVID vaccines. Loaning? The PA really needs these vaccines. They really need more than 1.2 million vaccines. The latest UN estimate, as of January 2021, has about 5.2 million Palestinians living in the West Bank. So any number of vaccines will help. Even a single dose of vaccine will help protect Palestinians and anyone who takes a single dose. But why lend the vaccines to the Palestinians? The Palestinians are scheduled to receive vaccines in 2022, probably from the World Health Organization. They have, I am told, also made some progress in procuring Chinese and Russian vaccines. Israel is giving them Pfizer vaccines. I presume that Israel will receive Pfizer vaccines in return. All these plans were rejected by the Palestinians in the end. The PA leadership rejected the vaccines minutes before they were arriving and promised to return 70,000 other vaccines. The reason for the return was that the vaccines were due to expire in July. This has become a huge scandal for the Palestinians. How could they have made such a blunder? After the blunder, the PA started a renegotiation for a new batch of vaccines. It happens, by the way, that Israel is still using those very same vaccines. In addition, 6 other countries stepped up and said, we want the vaccines, the very vaccines that the PA did not want. The biggest issue, though, is that the PA dragged out the negotiations for months. I'm very troubled by a just-released poll about evangelical Christians and their support for Israel. The poll was a joint effort between Americans and Israelis and was released by Tel Aviv University. The poll studied 700 evangelicals between the ages of 18 and 29. Participants were asked about their support for Israel. In 2018, get the number, 69% of the respondents supported Israel. Today, 2021, 3 years later, 33% support Israel. The 2018 poll asked evangelicals of all ages, but even taking that into account, these new results indicate a dramatic drop in support. The poll also indicated a striking increase in support for a Palestinian state. 44.7% of the respondents supported the establishment of a Palestinian state today, versus 35% 3 years ago. Evangelical Christians have traditionally been an essential ally for Israel and for the Jewish community. Israel used to spend time and energy and money developing and strengthening relations with this Christian community in the United States. It is now obvious that someone or somehow Israel dropped the ball with evangelical Christians. That is a real loss, a significant loss, a big loss for Israel. Iran has publicly announced that they have successfully enriched uranium to 60%. 60%, 6-0. That's good news, if there's any, is that they did not enrich a large amount of that uranium. Their announcement mentioned 6.5 kilos, which is about 14 pounds, of highly enriched uranium. The reality is that Iran is inching towards 90% of enriched uranium, which is high weapons-grade enrichment levels. Iranian spokesman Ali Rabai said that 108 kilo, 230 pounds of uranium has been enriched to 20% already. Israel's nervous. Serious thinkers are nervous. 90% is not simply a number. Once Iran has achieved 90% uranium enrichment, they can mount it on a missile and fly it to Israel, causing the deaths of thousands of Israelis. There is no good reason not to worry. Polling the Palestinians has never been an easy task. The Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research is the best of the polling vehicles in the Palestinian Authority. Though flawed, they have managed to give us more and better insight into the opinions of the Palestinians than any other polling organization. The center recently released a poll that shows a dramatic rise in Palestinian support for Hamas. This increased support of Hamas is certainly a direct result of the recent conflict between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. Almost 75% of the Palestinians concluded that Hamas was victorious against Israel in the last conflict. Victorious? The poll also showed that support for the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian leader President Mahmoud Abbas, plummeted dramatically. Fatah and Abbas garnered only 14%, while Hamas received 53% of support. This was in answer to the question which was, and I'm quoting here, most deserving of representing and leading the Palestinian people. These numbers are significant, and they are also worrisome. Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett has a warning for Hamas. As we all know, Hamas controls Gaza, and the Israeli Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, announced to Hamas and to Hamas leadership that Israel's patience has, I'm quoting, has run out, unquote, and that Israel will not, quote, tolerate any more violence, unquote, from Gaza. This is a theme that Bennett has been voicing for years. Bennett has much more to say to Hamas. He told them that, quote, residents of Gaza border communities are not second-class citizens. They deserve to live in peace and security. Our enemies must understand the rules. We will not tolerate violence, we will not tolerate sporadic fire, and we will not tolerate renegades, unquote. Bennett was very specific. He said that Israel, quote, does not have any intention to harm those who have not risen against us in violence, and those who are held captive by a ruthless and violent terror organization, unquote. Prime Minister Bennett also promised to retrieve the bodies of fallen Israeli soldiers and to bring home those Israelis still alive and held captive in Hamas custody. He told Israelis, quote, I know that over the years you have heard a lot of promises and statements, and the families only know disappointment and grief. But now it is our watch, and we are committed to this, unquote. These are easy things to say. The question is whether or not Bennett can act and effect change. They're very difficult challenges. Iran's only nuclear power plant broke down and went offline. The plant will be closed until it can be fixed. It needs parts from overseas. But because of international sanctions, parts are hard for Iran to procure. The plant, which opened in 2011 in Bushehr, one of its jobs actually was to reduce the cost of electricity across the country. It's a nuclear power plant. As a result, the Bushehr plant is going down. Electricity and electrical shortages will probably occur throughout Iran during the time that's no longer in action. The plant is actually very old. Iran started building it in the 1970s under the Shah. In 1979, because of the revolution in Iran, work stopped and was only picked up again finally and completed with the help of the Russians. The Russians are still helping out. The plant is uranium powered, and Iran gets its uranium from, you guessed it, Russia. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. I used the Yiddish word shanda earlier in my discussion. It's pronounced differently depending on your dialect and where you are located. Some might use the letter U instead of the O. Others might use an A, shanda, shunda, shanda. It means a shame, but not just any shame. It means an act that was performed by a Jew which embarrasses Judaism and Jews, all Jews. The best example of this would be Bernie Madoff. His actions were a shanda. Some people live their lives viewing actions through the prism of shanda. My mother-in-law would read newspapers, and when she came across stories about a person who had performed some vile or evil or certainly illegal act, she would ask, why did he need to have a Jewish name? Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.